Hi students, this is Dr. Spellman, and in this video we're going to talk about punishment. In particular, we're going to look at what punishment is, why people punish in the first place, and whether or not those punishments or those reasons for punishing are justified or not. So this is going to be kind of a quick video on the introduction to some of the theory behind this issue of when we should or shouldn't punish, and then we're going to go on and look at Michael Moore's paper in the next video. Alright, so what is punishment? Here's a definition. Punishment is the intentional infliction of harm by an authority for the violation of a rule. Now, there are 4 pieces of this definition that are important I want to highlight. So first, it's intentional. Punishment is not accidental. It's something that you do on purpose. It's got to be harm. Intentionally benefiting someone wouldn't be a punishment, but when we harm them, we are punishing them. It's got to be by an authority figure, so this rules out vigilante justice and that sort of thing. So when Batman harms a bad guy, that's not a punishment. There's got to be an authority that's doing the punishing. And then finally, it's got to be for violating a rule. If you're punishing someone when they're not violating any sort of rule, just because you want to, or something like that, then you're not punishing. So 4 pieces, right? It's got to be intentional. It's got to be a harm, right? It's got to make you worse off, impact your well-being in a kind of negative way. It's got to be by an authority for the violation of a rule. All right. So now that we've got a little bit better sense for what punishment is, we want to ask why we punish people. And there are a lot of different reasons we could give here for why we punish people. So we're going to look at a number of them. First, we might punish people just for denunciation purposes, right? To denounce what they're doing. And that's just a kind of expression of society's disapproval of the action that you're doing. Murder, why would we punish murderers? Just because we want to say, like, murder is bad, stop it. That would be one reason. Another reason that's maybe especially popular is the sort of deterrence reason. So one reason you might think we punish murder is because we want to discourage people from doing it. Like, stop murdering. Because people are murdering, we're going to throw them in prison, and that's going to deter other people who might be considering murdering. Now, one thing I like to note here, just kind of for fun, is that there's a difference between a couple kinds of deterrence. So there's general deterrence, and that's what we have in mind when we want to deter the public or other people other than the person performing the act from doing it in the future. So when it comes to murder, like say Joe murders Jim, when we want to deter all of society from murdering, we punish Joe, and that's to say hey, don't do that murdering thing in the future. But there's another kind of deterrence, special deterrence, and that's when we want to deter the agent in question from doing something again. So if Joe murders Jim, we punish Joe to prevent Joe from doing it again, right? We're sort of saying, hey, we're throwing you in prison. Next time you consider murdering someone, you might want to reflect on the fact that remember what happened last time, and that will hopefully discourage them from doing it again. All right, so that's one of the big sort of reasons people give for punishing. We'll talk more about this, obviously, but another one is incapacitation. The idea here is that we just want to keep the person from doing the same thing. So in the case of murder, right, we want to just lock the person up, and the thought is if we lock this person up, then they can't go and murder a bunch of other people. So it's not so much to discourage other people from doing it, or to discourage the person him or herself from doing it. We're just sort of setting the person aside to keep them from doing the same thing again. A fourth reason people give for punishment is they think it might have a rehabilitative function. So we might punish people to rehabilitate them. The thought here is that maybe treating them harshly or harming them in a certain way is going to make them into a better person. um, whether or not I don't know, whether or not this is really a great, a plausible explanation for why we have the kind of prison system we do, is a question that I'll leave up to you. I think it's probably not really a great, if we want to rehabilitate people, putting them in prison might not be a great strategy. So I think some prisons are called like rehabilitation centers or something like that, and you might think, well, that's just like a bit misleading because that's not really what they're trying to do. But here, therapy, some sorts of other things, hard, as long as it's a kind of hard treatment or harm, if it's aimed at rehabilitation, then we could think of that as a kind of punishment. Fifth reason is restoration. So one reason we might punish someone is to kind of like undo the harm to the victim. Now this is like kind of confusing, and you might think, I don't really see how punishment does this, and that is plausible. But you might just think there's something about evening the score or settling the, balancing things out in a way that we're trying to accomplish when we punish someone. So if you steal something from someone and they're made worse off as a result, punishing the person who caused the harm makes them worse off, and maybe we're sort of like balancing things out to where they were before. Now, again, I think that maybe that reasoning is kind of strained, and so people who think that this is a good, who are sort of advocates of something like restorative justice, tend to think that like punishment's not really the way to go. There might be some sort of mutual agreement on like, here's how we should address or deal with this situation. The final kind of punishment I want to talk about, or final reason for punishment that I want to talk about, is retribution. This is sort of another big one, I think, like deterrence. A lot of people think the reason we punish isn't necessarily even to deter or incapacitate, do any of those things. We just think that the criminal deserves to be in jail. So you murdered someone, hey, we're going to put you in prison for the rest of your life, or we're going to execute you. We think what we're doing there is just giving the person what they deserve. Okay, the next question we want to look at is, when is punishment justified? And this is like sort of the big theoretical question that's sitting in the background. So we have an idea about what punishment is, and then there's this question, when is this act going to be justified? When is it okay, morally speaking, to do it? And there are three popular answers to that question. So one is utilitarianism, number two is retributivism, and the third one is what we'll call the mixed theory. And we're going to take a look at each of those theories here. All right, utilitarianism about punishment is a view advocated by people who are utilitarians about morality, often in general. Here I've got a picture of Richard Brandt. He has a reading on utilitarianism about punishment. And the utilitarian view, sort of broadly speaking, is that punishment is justified if and only if it's useful. So when it produces good consequences. Remember, we just talked about deterrence as a potential reason for punishing people. That's the kind of reason that a utilitarian would think is the right kind of reason for punishment. Punishment here is not about doing what the person deserves or giving them what they deserve. The purpose here is to bringing about a better future. If we didn't punish anyone, people would just kill all over the place. So when we punish, we deter other people from killing, and that makes the world better, safer. Now, if you think punishment is justified if and only if it's useful, you're going to agree to a conditional that looks kind of like this. So punishment's justified if and only if it's useful. That sort of two-headed arrow, the arrow going both directions, says that when a punishment is justified, then it's useful, and if it's useful, then it's justified. So here for this sort of number one, I'm emphasizing this. If it's useful, then it's justified. So if punishing someone would be a good thing, if it would bring about good consequences, then it's okay to do, morally speaking. The other direction, so the arrow's going the other way, we get if punishment's justified, then it's useful. Another way to say this is that punishment's justified only if it's useful. So when punishment's useful, it's justified, and if it's not useful, then it's not justified. That's sort of the idea. Here, what the utilitarian wants to emphasize is that if punishing someone is going to have no good consequences, then it's not going to be justified. So it's only okay to punish someone when that is going to be useful. And then the final sort of principle or idea we want to associate with this utilitarian view about punishment is that the amount of punishment we give someone should be tailored so that it maximizes happiness, or maximizes what utilitarians call utility, which is kind of like the balance between happiness and sadness, or good and bad. So the thought is, if we punish liars by executing them, that seems like maybe we're punishing them too much, and we could probably get the deterrent effect that we want with a smaller penalty. Conversely, if we're punishing murderers with like a minute in timeout, that's too small of a penalty, and we could achieve a better deterrent effect and a better consequences in general if we punished murderers a bit more harshly. So again, utilitarianism about punishment is just this idea that how much we punish and when we punish should be determined solely by the kinds of effects that punishment is going to bring about. All right, the next view we're going to look at is retributivism about punishment. So this is a view that's endorsed by Michael Moore. You've got a picture of him here. Michael Moore thinks when we think about why we should punish people, we're not going to be justified just because it's going to bring about some good consequences in the future, right? Rather, it's going to be justified because the person deserves it, because they committed some crime and they need to do the time. That's the idea. So retributivism about punishment is this view that punishment's justified if and only if it's deserved. So if we were going to symbolize that, right, the thought is, again, we have punishment's justified if and only if it is deserved. Now, that double-headed arrow, right, it can go both directions. So we can break that up into these two separate claims. The first one, if punishment's deserved, then it's justified. And what we're saying here is just that if we come across someone who deserves to be punished, they murdered someone, then we're justified in punishing them, even if it wouldn't be useful, right? Usefulness doesn't matter. What matters is desert. The second sort of piece of this theory is that if punishment is justified, then it's deserved. So if punishment's not deserved, you can't do it. The thought here is if it's useful to punish someone but they haven't done anything wrong, then you can't punish them. All right. The third idea is that the amount of punishment that one receives shouldn't be tailored to what's useful or what's going to maximize happiness. Rather, it should be tailored to what one deserves. So we're going to focus. That's going to be the focus. Desert, not usefulness or utility. The final theory we're going to look at is called the mixed theory of punishment, and that theory says that punishment is justified if and only if it's both useful and deserved. You got to have both of those two things in order for punishment to be justified. So if we symbolize, we say it's justified if and only if it's useful and deserved. So it's got to be both of those things. So if we divide that up, right? If useful and deserved, if punishing someone would have both of those properties, then it's going to be justified. It's going to be okay to do it. And if punishment is justified, then it's got to be useful and deserved. So if it's justified, then it's got to be useful and deserved. The idea here is that if it's useful to punish someone and they deserve it, then it's okay to punish them. But if one of those things doesn't apply, if it's not useful, if it's not deserved, then punishment is not going to be justified. The final third piece of this theory says the amount of punishment that someone receives should be one of the following three things. So broadly speaking, it should be tailored to maximize usefulness and desert sort of together. Both of those things are important. But there are a number of different ways you could fill out the precise details of this view. So one way you might fill it out is to say, what I want punishment to do is I want it to be as useful as possible as long as I don't go too far. So I don't have to give someone exactly what they deserve. Rather, my focus is on maximizing the utility as long as I don't punish them too much. So I can give them something less than they deserve if that's the thing that's going to maximize utility. The second option is you might be focused on desert, and the usefulness is sort of a secondary criteria. So I'm going to focus on giving them what they deserve. So I say be as deserved as possible. So it's as close as we can get to giving them what they deserve without being useless. So the thought is, as long as the punishment's producing some good consequences better than others, we can do it, and we're going to focus on trying to give them exactly what they deserve. The final option is that we're going for some balance. So A and B both have like a constraint. So A, the constraint is we can't give them something undeserved. For B, the constraint is we can't give them punishment that's useless. For C, the thought is that maybe there's no real constraint here, but we're just sort of trying to balance usefulness and deservedness together. So we might want to give someone a punishment that's not the most useful thing if it's more deserved, or maybe we want to give someone something they don't quite deserve, given that it's sufficiently useful to give them that punishment. All right, so those are our theories of punishment, and what we want to ask, or what we want to think about going forward is, which of these theories is right? And so to just apply these to a case we've already looked at, right, we might ask ourselves, which of the theories that we've just described could we use to justify a three strikes punishment like the punishment that Andrade received in, now I'm forgetting the name of it, Lockyer versus Andrade. So remember, he stole a bunch of videotapes and he gets this 50-year sentence. What theory that I've just described, or what theories that I've just described, would say that Lockyer's punishment is justified? What kind of theory would the legislature have been thinking was the right theory in order to think that it was okay to punish someone, put someone in jail for 50 years for stealing $150 worth of videotapes? So think about that question, trying to answer it to yourself right before you move on, and just see if your answer is the right one. So which theory can be used to justify these three-strike punishments? The answer to that question is that utilitarianism is the theory that can justify the three strikes punishment. So what happens in a three-strike punishment is that the punishment goes way beyond what the person deserves, right? No one thinks that Andrade really deserves to be in prison for 50 years for stealing $150 worth of stuff. That punishment is incredibly overboard. The thought is, to someone especially who's a retributivist. And insofar as the mixed theory is one where your punishment has to be deserved in order to be justified, we certainly couldn't justify punishment like that. So I think the answer here is that utilitarianism is the theory that we would be using to justify three strikes punishments. And usually the thought here is that it's some combination of deterrence or incapacitation, that if someone just really can't stop breaking the law, we need to give them a stronger punishment to discourage them from committing crime, or we need to incapacitate them, just lock them away so that they can't harm anyone. All right, that's the end of this video, and next time we'll be taking a look at Michael Moore's paper arguing for the retributivist theory of punishment. Have a good one.